Well, hello, everyone. This is Mike Kunkel, and I welcome you to 10 Steps to Future-Proof Your Salesforce and Transform Results. Welcome to this on-demand presentation. So look, I know it's always scary when a presenter starts with a slide that says how to survive this presentation and do something with it. But I really want to give you as much value as possible. So I'm going to break every presentation rule in the book today. And this deck is really meant as a resource for you to go back and look at later. So here's some advice about how to get the most out of this. I'm going to cover a lot of content today in these 10 steps. Go for big picture. Look for dot connections back to your situation and make some notes perhaps about where you want to dive deeper. Look, I know we're not together here and this is a virtual presentation, but you can submit questions to me if you'd like. If you're viewing this through ATD, just reach out to me at mike.kunkel@sparxiq.com, just like you see it here on the slide. I'd suggest that you download the slides and review them, even rewatch this recording as needed, and then dig into the big appendix. I put together an appendix for you at the end of this. I'm not going to go through all of that today in the time frame we've got, but check out the free content in there and some of the special offers as well. And then start to use what makes sense to you that we talked about today, make an impact, and then write to me. I would really love to hear from you if you're using any of this content that I shared today. You make an impact, reach out and let me know, in addition to questions that you might have over time. So that's my disclaimer about the presentation. Let's rock and roll and hold on to your hats, as it says here, as we work through these 10 steps to future-proof your Salesforce and transform your sales results. So step one, strategy, then go-to-market tactics, then talent and execution. Here's why I say that. I put these things in three big buckets, or in this case, three columns: strategic planning, go-to-market tactical planning, and talent and execution. Now, if you look on the left here, we've got things like marketplace analysis, your customer and buyer acumen, their roles and goals and personas. And we're going to get into all of that in the buyer acumen section, but also things like product market fit. What's your business model? What's your strategic pricing? How about your organization's mission, vision, and values? All of this strategic stuff that, very often as sales enablers, we're not tied into. We're the recipient of some of this in organizations. Now, look, if you have that kind of seat at the table, good for you, but many in enablement do not. So you do need to be aware of these things, though, and we'll talk about why. And again, SWOT analysis, digital strategy, all the sales analytics, these things feed into the go-to-market tactical planning that we do have a degree of control over. Now, working for a senior sales leader, perhaps not all of this is within our control, but these are the things that we are more closely plugged into. And by the way, you can see that I do include marketing and service or customer success here. These things are important parts of the go-to-market tactical plan too, but today we're talking specifically about the sales piece. Those of you in revenue enablement roles or other larger roles, sales ops roles, might look at some of these other things as well. But here in sales, we're talking about the sales model, the org structure, the roles, the way you're going to market, getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, in territories, account assignments, goals, quotas, comp, all of the things the gears that turn that make a sales force successful. Then we've got process and methodology, messaging, collateral, technology and tools. These things sound familiar? This is the stuff sales enablement's made of, right? A sales management system and a cadence, and then even force field analysis or the development of action plans to implement or improve the things above. This is the go-to-market tactical planning stuff. But just doing this stuff without ensuring that you have the things to the left, not as effective as it would be otherwise. And then Here's where we really play in talent and execution: the hiring, training, enabling, coaching, developing, supporting, managing, and leading, all of the things that help develop the sales culture in your organization, in the way that you prepare teams to do the stuff in the middle and go to market effectively. Now, the key to this stuff is that generally the things on the left are prerequisites for the things to the right. You don't always have control over them, but you need to understand them. And, honestly, there's a little piece of career advice that I'm giving you here, that when you're exploring an organization that you want to join and do enablement for, knowing that they're doing the things to the left well can really be helpful for your career, because you're not going to fix a bad product market fit in enablement. You might help improve how the sales force works with buyers and goes to market, but that's not a problem solely that you'll fix in enablement. Now, we could also debate the top to bottom order. These things aren't necessarily in order. Some of them do flow logically, but the left to right order is important to get each box right before you move on. So what's the bottom line here? Watch for dependencies, work left to right. Consider what's GEFN. That's my acronym for good enough for now. And what's missing in these three columns. Ensure that you've got alignment across them, even the things that you don't necessarily control. And then align your work with the leadership goals and objectives from your C-suite team and, of course, your senior sales leader. Plan to close the gaps that you control first, and then focus on executing with discipline. This is how you can make the best use out of this chart and begin to start driving the results that you want. Step 2, building buyer acumen. I can't tell you how important this is, and I can't tell you how often I see this missing. You can do this at 2 levels. Overall, what are the roles, goals, and responsibilities for the buyers that your sales force works with or their clients? What are the current and desired future states generally for these personas and their coin-op and gap and impact analysis? And you can see on the bottom, we'll talk about this again, coin-op is just an acronym for challenges, opportunities, impacts, needs, outcomes, and priorities. So what are those things for the buyers that you work with in their various roles? CFO, Director of Operations, Senior Sales Manager, whatever the personas might be that you sell to. What are the common initiatives they work on? What are the size of the problems they face and the budgets that they manage? How are they measured and evaluated? What are the metrics that matter most to them? And then what other factors like risks or pressures or preferences or politics come into affecting that role? And then you can move into what are the overall and decision factors for when these personas buy what you sell. This now starts to move into their buying process, or buyer's journey, as is sometimes called, and the buying committee, who they go on this journey with, who in their organization is on the buying committee, the other influencers and decision makers, their overall decision criteria for a purchase, but then the individual buying process exit criteria, including emotional and personal factors. And exit criteria is just a geeky term from the software development and agile and other worlds that in process work, actually. It just means what needs to be completed in a given stage before you can move forward to the next stage. We'll talk more about this as well. What are the value drivers? How each of these personas perceive value. CFOs, obviously, more financially oriented. A director of operations will worry more about operational metrics and perhaps process. Different buyers have different types of value. And then what are the common concerns they face? Folks, if you understand this kind of stuff about your buyers and customers, this is the foundational stuff that will allow you to build a sales enablement and a sales effectiveness program and go-to-market plans that can radically improve your organization's performance. Let's take a look at some of these elements of buyer acumen that are so critical. This is what I call a situation assessment. It's the way we teach discovery at SPARXiQ as well in modern sales foundations. COIN-OP, again, challenges, opportunities, impacts, needs, outcomes, and priorities. And you do this in a framework of what's the current state, or point A, what's their desired future state, or point B, and then you can see how COIN-OP spreads across the bottom with the challenges, opportunities in the current state and the impact starting there, by the needs, outcomes, and priorities of the desired future state, with the needs sort of sliding into the middle, where you can do a needs analysis, a gap analysis about what's missing or what's needed to get from the current state to the future state, and what would the dollarized impact of that move be. This allows you to start to build a compelling business case. Now, this is actually a methodology for consulting that we adapted to discovery that I'm saying works just as well for you as enablers when you're working inside as a sales organization to really understand current state, future state, what's required to close the gap, and what impact it will have if you do that. And then that allows you to get the budget that you need to really make things happen. Really important. And it's as important to you apply this to your buyers as well. So this is a multi-dimensional situation assessment, if you will, because if you understand this internally and you understand how your buyers think about this, you have the best of both worlds, but a big piece of buyer acumen. Now, another step of buyer acumen is this geeky thing about buying process exit criteria. Now, this is a sample buying process. It may not be the buying process that your customers go through, right? But it's an example. And notice that in process work, there are stages. The first one here is identify possible initiatives in this buying process, but there are also 3 rows there: objectives, tasks, and exit criteria. So every process has stages, and in those stages, there are objectives or things you want to accomplish. There are the tasks that you do that will help you accomplish them, and there are the exit criteria, or what needs to be done in that stage to move forward. Now, buying process exit criteria is whatever your buyers need to see, hear, feel, understand, or believe in a given stage to move forward to the next stage. Your job in the upper left here is to uncover these exit criteria by persona when you're doing the persona work, or by real buyer in a deal, clarify to really ensure you understand them, satisfy those exit criteria as best you can, and then confirm that they've been satisfied. Now, here's the tricky thing about exit criteria, but also the thing that makes this concept powerful. Here are an example with 2 buyers. These buyers have the same exit criteria in this stage. In the second stage, where they're identifying and researching vendors, their exit criteria are different. Third stage, the same. Fourth stage, different. Last stage, the same. Now imagine you have 5 buyers, or in some crazy cases that we hear about, 10 or more. Suddenly, that's a lot of work understanding their various exit criteria, but it does allow you and your sellers to stop selling by superstition. In other words, to stop doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result, which Einstein called insanity. This is what's powerful about the concept of buying process exit criteria. Also powerful is the concept of the value drivers. Now, on the left, you see an acronym AIR. Every deal needs air to breathe, right? And awareness, interest, and relationships. The interest portion of that really starts to become, can you get someone's interest based on what matters to them? It's very other-centric or buyer-centric. And people have various kinds of values. In modern sales foundations, we actually categorize them as business value, experiential, aspirational, and personal. Now, look, you can genericize this during persona research for marketing and sales readiness, but your sellers, they actually need to get down to the real value for each decision maker and influencer in the deal. So you can start by building the buyer acumen, noting what matters. A CFO probably has business value. Excuse me, CFOs are more worried about the meaningful impact on the key financial metrics. A director of operations might be worried more about experiential value or the improvement or easing of day-to-day processes, and so on. If you take a look at this as you review, you can start to determine what are the likely value drivers by persona, and then again, teach your reps to go one level past persona to understand what really matters to each person. Now, the next step is kind of fun because now as you're building buyer acumen, you start to understand what are their buying preferences. We're seeing a lot of research about this from analysts today, right? We say that buyers want to research things on their own and they're looking for third-party validation, not just what the company or the sales rep says, and so on. So examples of things to consider are, do they want to work online or in person? Do they want self-service or sales supported? Or when do they want each? Do they want to work synchronously with you, asynchronously? You send them stuff and review it. What really works best for them? Are they looking for vendor collateral versus peer feedback versus third-party perspectives, or some mix, and so on? When you do the buyer research or hire an expert to do it for you, if they look and listen for these things, you can start to adapt to the buying preferences. Now, even when you're being buyer-centric, there needs to be a balance between what people prefer and what really works best. And here's an example. There's some recent studies that show that 1 of 5, 20% of millennial buyers preferred self-service when they were buying, but a chunk of them, right? I'm sorry, it was probably, I think 40% preferred it, but a full 20%, 1 in 5, had buyer's remorse at the end when they didn't engage with a sales rep who would have answered questions or offered some advice. So sometimes what people want to do may not always be in their own best interest. And if you're buyer-centric, you're operating in your buyer's best interest. So sometimes you do have to try to find a balance between these things, but understanding the preferences and trying to adapt to them will differentiate you from the average sales organization. So what's the bottom line here with all of this buyer acumen stuff? Everything you do should start and build from deep knowledge of your buyers and customers. So seek to understand and research them and what are their roles and goals, the coin-op initiatives, all the things we've talked about here, clear through to buying preferences. The better you understand the mindset and preferences of your buyers and customers, the more prepared your sales force will be to succeed with them. This is foundational. Step 3, align with your sales process with your customer lifecycle. Now, here is an example again of a consultative customer lifecycle. And in this case, where a client is actually purchasing something that gets implemented or used. There are other types of life cycles or buying processes where they perhaps buy things transactionally. We're just going to take a look at this one and go into a little detail. Now, this is pre-buying. On top is the customer life cycle. They're not actually buying anything yet, right? They're just going through their normal business motions. They're doing some strategic planning. They create tactical plans. They start to implement the plans and run their year. And maybe they begin to encounter and assess issues, hopefully issues that you could help solve. Now below, in this sales stage, it doesn't really align with anywhere in this customer life cycle, because if you're prospecting, you very often won't know where the customer is in their life cycle. But you prepare to work with them wherever they might be. Here is the buying stage. Now, again, this is one example. And you notice that, again, there's still objectives, tasks, and exit criteria for each stage of the process, whether it's the buying process or sales process. But this is how you can begin to align your sales process with what your customers are going through. While customers are identifying possible initiatives, You're doing a situation assessment and qualifying. When they're researching and comparing solutions, you're doing solution development, or even better, co-creating solutions with them. And so this is how you align things. Same thing post-buying. In post-buying now, it's about how do they implement the solution and execute. They implement it, they measure, assess outcomes, they run the business, all the while you're going along for that journey and supporting them. At the end of that, they go right back to running their business. And they're out of a buying cycle or a post-buying cycle and back into their natural environment, their natural habitat, if you will, and you're observing them looking for other ways that you can support them. That's how you can align sales process with the full customer life cycle. So to build on your buyer acumen, determine and document the full life cycle, align your sales work and sales processes to the buying processes and the larger life cycle, and then teach your reps to assess where your buyers are in that life cycle and adapt to where they are. If you're prospecting and they just bought a competitive solution, probably not going to win that one. But you could nurture it, or maybe even depending upon where they are and have they started and what's the cost of the solution and pain of change, who knows? Maybe you have a chance to hone in there. Circumstances vary, and that's very situational and very nuanced. But if they've just bought something, likely you're going to need to be considered for a next round, or you'll wait and see how well your competitor performs for them. So that's why assessing where they are is important. If you're very early in that process, you may need to help them see that a problem is coming that they can avoid and avoid the pain of having to deal with it rather than wait until it looms upon them. And you could help them that with insights and data and case studies and other customers that you've done similar work for. So again, teach your reps to assess where the buyers are and adapt accordingly. Step 4, adopt an effective sales methodology. This brings us right back to the same thing with the customer life cycle, the buying process, and how you respond to it. And now we'll focus on the sales process side. Sales methodology, very simply, are the buyer or client facing selling tasks. So if you look at the green highlights here, this is just the task section of the sales process. Not every task in the sales process is sales methodology, but the buyer or client facing ones that involve selling would be the methodology. And this includes the frameworks, the models, and skill sets needed to succeed, sometimes referred to as sales competencies, like your prospecting approach or your qualification methodology and discovery, building a business case, which, by the way, continue with that light green line all the way through the sales process and customer life cycle. Then things like presentation, negotiating, gaining commitment, and on the bottom, exit criteria management and the ability to resolve concerns, which can happen anywhere across the customer life cycle. So with a methodology, there are a lot of benefits of having an aligned methodology that matches your sales process, which aligns to your buyer's journey. It's a common language across the sales force as one. Then you also have the ability to integrate your methodology into your CRM or your guided selling support systems. You now have the ability to build reinforcement mechanisms like qualification scoring or job aids and forms or content in sales support collateral because you're using a primary methodology. And now your managers have the ability to coach systematically and consistently across the company, which creates an incredible efficiency and allows them to increase adoption and improve performance. Lastly, increases the ability to move the needle with adoption, and we'll talk about why that's important. Now, there's some caveat emptor or buyer beware things here as we talk about methodology. Many of the commercial methodologies, the ones that you can buy on the market, do not cover that full customer life cycle that we just talked about. And this can decrease effectiveness if you don't pair it with others that align and cover the rest of that life cycle. So the other thing I've seen is that many methodologies are good, but they're so detailed and they're complex, and it makes them really challenging to implement and to get adoption across the sales force. Your job as a sales leader is to figure out which methodology is going to work best when it comes to executing your sales process with your target personas. This is how things start to gel and come together. Now, I'm not going to cover this eye chart. This is one of those things that I think you can go back to and take a look at. But these are some factors to consider to help you determine methodology fit and how successful it will be. It looks at the way that your reps sell and what they face. It looks at, can you actually implement this methodology to get a 75% or greater adoption? Do you know it will get results to you? These are some questions that I think you'll find incredibly helpful. Here's why I keep talking about adoption and why it matters. CSO Insights did an annual sales enablement study each year, and at their fifth one, they found a really interesting fact that only sales process and sales methodology adoption rates that were north of 75% actually resulted in above average results for revenue plan attainment, quota attainment, and win rates. So if you truly want to move the needle, you need to get a decent adoption rate, 75% or greater, for your methodology and process. That's why adoption matters. So what's our bottom line on this one? Well, methodology is the buyer-facing selling task in each stage. How you sell is methodology, the frameworks, the models, the steps, the skills, the playbooks. The methodology that you select can really make a difference between adoption and success or chaos and struggle. And adoption rates above 75% really start to deliver results. Keep that in mind as you work on number 4. Step 5, develop buyer-centric messaging. This is another chart that I think you'll want to come back to. But if you look, what it's got is buyer personas on the left, and in this case just has 5 of them. You may need less or more rows. But then it starts to ask these questions like, what's their coin up? What are the challenges, opportunities, impacts, needs, outcomes, and priorities generally for each of those personas? What are their value drivers that we talked about earlier? What are their buyer types? Are they a financial buyer? Feasibility? Are they judging how feasible it is? Are they judging the functional, the people that actually are going to use your product at the front line? What are their metrics? How are they measured? What are the value stories that messaging that matters to them based on CoinUp? What questions should you ask, and how should you do discovery based on CoinUp? How should you demo your product or present to them if you don't have a demonstratable product, right, based on CoinUp and these other factors? How do you build solutions to address CoinUp? What are the common concerns? Who are your competitors and how you position against them? And how will you enable the outcomes they want and talk about it in their value driver language? This is great work, by the way, for product marketing teams as well, because this buyer-centric messaging matrix will prepare your sales force to have better business conversations by product based on the personas and what matters to them. This is straight out of Modern Sales Foundations, and we can certainly demonstrate more of this type of thing for you if this is something that you believe would help. But definitely you want to think about, how do we prepare our sales force to talk about our products and message, if you will, in ways that matter to our buyers? And now you're again seeing downstream effects of buyer acumen. This is where the value drivers come back in again, right? Being able to express about your products and solutions in the words that matter to your buyers. Now, I call this being multilingual. I know that's a little confusing sometimes because no, I'm not talking about English, German, French, and Spanish. I'm talking about, can you talk CFO? Can you talk Director of Manufacturing? Can you talk Chief Revenue Officer whoever your personas are, chief executive officer, can you speak their language? There's an old saying in sales that you get referred to who you sound like. So if you're talking to a CEO using language that a director of sales training would understand, you're going to get referred to the director of sales training. Now, that might not always be a bad thing if the director of sales training owns the problem you're trying to solve for them and has the budget and authority to use it. But if you want to stay on the CEO level, you need to speak about things and problems and solutions in language that resonates for them. That's important and part of developing buyer-centric messaging. So, using your buyer acumen, develop relevant messaging that resonates with your buyers and customers, building on the coin op and pose and value drivers and buyer types, and personalizing then on the sales side for the real people that you're speaking with and what matters to them. The buyer persona work is great for marketing and starting in sales. You take that to the person level throughout your buyer's journey. Step 6, building a buyer engagement content plan. Now, we throw around the term content a lot in this business, and content actually means multiple things. It could be marketing content, buyer engagement content, training content, or sales support content. We're going to focus here mostly on marketing and buyer engagement content. So, guess what? Back to the buying process, back to your exit criteria, right? Which could be different for each buyer. And now you develop content that's marketing content that will generate interest for these personas and get them engaged. Then to keep them engaged and to provide the collateral and information they need in decision support throughout the journey to help them decide to keep moving forward. In other words, stuff that satisfies their buying process exit criteria. You develop content for each stage of their journey based on what's likely to solve and satisfy their exit criteria by persona. Now, if you develop this content, remember, make it personalizable or customizable by your sales force. So when they're working with it, they can pull the right content for stage 3 for the average CFO, but then customize it for Sally and what matters to her. But this is how you can start to use a content plan to support your buyers and support your sellers in supporting them. So, content plans based on buyer acumen, again, align with marketing and product marketing. Use content as a magnet, that marketing magnet, to gain awareness and create interest, and then use the content as decision support to give the buyers and decision makers what they need to satisfy their buying process exit criteria along the journey. That's how you do it. Step 7, use a sales training system. This will mine gold for you on the training side. Let's take a look and take a little tour through it. In the first stage, in the lighter blue here, and now outlined in green, this is where you prepare for change. Now, notice I'm not saying this is where you prepare for training, because what we do when we're training and doing sales enablement is really change management, especially if you're implementing a process or a methodology, right? So you want to ensure, first of all, in the center, that the training content that you're about to teach will absolutely deliver results in the real world if you can get it used. It's one of the big gaps is that sometimes the content that we're trying to train or get people to use won't really matter if it gets executed. You need to know that the content's going to work. Top producer analysis, by the way, certainly a great way to do that. Then you design a great learning experience. And here at ATD, I know that many of you understand instructional design and ISD and ADDIE and other models, SAM, right? So whatever you're doing, ensure a great learning design that will help people learn what you're teaching and engage their managers. You want to engage them, enable them, empower frontline sales managers especially, because they are the linchpin and the performance lever that will drive change and success in the organization. There was a study that ATD does, the state of sales training, every couple of years. And one year, the survey results showed that I think it was 50%, or some number close to that, that said that the single biggest barrier to sales training being effective was the inability to hold reps accountable for using what they were taught. A couple years later, that number had gone up to 59%. That's just crazy talk, folks, right? Because if we know that we're teaching stuff that will improve performance, but we're not asking or holding our reps accountable to use it, that's a serious problem and a reason why so much training goes unused or doesn't produce results. So we need to engage, enable, empower, get buy-in from those frontline sales managers and have them understand what you're teaching, and then how to coach and reinforce it, which is this next stage, guiding the change. This is what I call the 5 stages of sales mastery and behavior change. You train the content and validate that learning occurred in stage 1, learn. Stage 2, remember, you do something purposefully to sustain that knowledge. In stage 3, practice, you get them to use the skills in practice sessions where they get feedback and they get feedback and they apply that feedback, and there's a learning loop, right, with experts. And then you help prepare them to apply what they've learned in the real world with real clients and customers and prospects. And then you observe them over time and coach them to mastery. And when you can get your managers engaged in those 5 stages, that will radically improve adoption and improve the ability of your sales force to apply your process, your methodology, whatever it is that you're trying to get them to do, negotiate more effectively, etc. When you're done with those, the work isn't over. This is where we often let up. Now we have to cement the change, getting metrics and measures in place, because we all know that what gets measured gets done, right? And then manage to the behavior and performance expectations, which starts to involve your performance management systems. And then lead and manage that change until it cements in the culture. You can incorporate these things that you've been teaching into pipeline meetings, forecast meetings, value reviews, whatever it is that, whatever ways exist that you can inculcate this into the organization. Stick with it long enough until change occurs. Because change is sometimes, or getting people to change, is like stretching a rubber band. If you let go too soon, it snaps back, right? And so you have to continue to stretch that rubber band until it stays the size that you want, or until basically what you're trying to teach becomes the way we do things around here, which means it's now your culture. So there it is, the entire sales training system. So this was step 7, prepare for change, guide that change with the 5 stages, and then cement the change in your culture. We're at step 8, develop sales coaching excellence. Another thing that engages the managers, and a way to get into a cadence and a coaching culture with a cadence of continuous improvement. Lots of C's in there, right? This is really a way to get into an ongoing cadence. Now, look at this framework in the coaching process. There are inputs on the left that come into it. Their knowledge of the competencies or the methodology and process, right? Diagnostics that you've got to help managers figure out who needs help with what, or sales competency metrics and measures, so you can see who's doing well with what, who might need help. All of those things are input into the conversation between the reps and the managers. Now, in my opinion, our opinion at SPARXiQ, we believe that the reps own their development. The managers then become the guide or the Sherpa along the journey to help them get where they want to go. It's a really great way to foster engagement and trust, authenticity, and create a developmental culture. Then you move into the process where together they diagnose the rep's performance. And we'll talk about this Rome model that you see at the bottom. Then they plan together to figure out, well, if we understand the root cause of the problem, what's the best solution? And we'll share a solution chart. Then the rep actually starts to go out and do the things that they've been trained and coached through these steps, and then review them in looping between do and review until they get the results that you want. And then an important thing happens with that gray arrow at the bottom. They go right back to the beginning and start over again. By the way, the outputs of that planning are personalized learning plans, field training that happens from the managers, sales coaching that happens with the managers, resulting in action plans that get put into place and do and review that get you to those results. This is the sales coaching framework with the coaching process that we endorse. Now, this diagnosing with Rome is pretty interesting because when you're diagnosing, you start by looking at what are the results my rep is getting, and how do those results compare to the objectives and goals or quota, however you track it or what you call it, but those objectives that are set. When there is a gap, that indicates an area to dig into, right? Pretty simple, but it's surprising how often it's not thought about this way. When you're exploring that gap, you can explore then what are the activities that my rep is doing? What are they doing? In what quantities? Who are they doing it with? Maybe even when and where. If you fix those things, you can very often improve performance, but not always. And so when you explore those and fixing the activity doesn't fix the problem, then you explore the methodology, which is really the quality of execution of those activities. How and how well they're selling, how are they using that sales process and sales methodology we talked about earlier. That's diagnosing with Rome. Then the solution chart is really about determining the best solution type. This is a chart that I've adapted from the work of Ferdinand Forney's, and I've added conditions on the left. They don't know something, and the reasons for non-performance, or they don't know what to do, why to do it, or how to do it. And in that case, training is the right solution. And if they know what, why, and how, but just need to do it better, coaching starts to become the right solution. And you can go through this entire chart. Sometimes there's incorrect thinking. They think their way is better, your way won't work. Consequences might be misaligned. There might be honest to goodness constraints. There are a variety of reasons of why people don't do what they're supposed to do, and then what to do about it. This whole chart is important, but when you're training and coaching, what really matters are the top ones. What also matters is don't try to train and coach to fix a problem that appears in the bottom two boxes, because it will not work. So determining the best solution type is very important. When the best solution type is training or coaching, these models are very helpful. A field training model that does tell, show, do, review, or a coaching model that does engage, practice, do, review. Those little green check marks are critical and so often missed. They're simply an understanding check. So let's use the field training model as an example. You would tell somebody something, they repeat it back to you. Don't leave that stage until they do it to your satisfaction. You show them or role play something, they role play it back to you. Don't leave that stage until they do that to your satisfaction. You've now had 2 understanding checks. Then they go forth to do. Well, if they don't do it, you now know they understood what you wanted. They could do what you wanted, but something else is now in the way. Now you can start to get to the root cause of non-performance. That's a simple example. You can do the same with sales coaching model. And the SLED model is just a process that you can use when you're leading individual coaching sessions, regardless of which model you're using. All right. These are all things that help improve coaching performance. Then it's, where do your solutions come from? It could be known best practices, top producer practices, could be from your company's training, an approved external resource, your experience or expertise, or your reps. Maybe it's the A players on your team, or one we don't often think about. It might be a B or C player in your company who just happens to excel at X, whatever X is, right? Or whatever it is that your sales rep needs. right? There's so many ways that you can engage people to create solutions. And of course, your chosen sales methodology. So that's the entire sales coaching excellence framework. If you get coaching excellence going in your organization and you do it on this repeated loop, at GE Capital as one example, we did this loop every 6 months. I've seen organizations do it quarterly. It's in faster paced organizations where they could do that. That's great. 6 months also works great. Probably don't want to go longer than that, but at least every 6 months you get into this assessing, diagnose, plan, do, review model, working constantly to improve rep performance. So it's a journey. Reps and managers take it together. You diagnose and plan to do the solution type and content that we talked about. They go to do and review, and that loops, and you get into a cadence and you stay the course on that until you change the culture and get the results that you want. Step 9, we're nearing the end. Implementing a sales management system. This is so key. First step, getting barriers out of the way that prevent managers from spending time with their reps. We often throw so much on managers that they don't have the time to spend developing their teams. It's their primary responsibility. So let's get out of the sales prevention business. Then managers need to understand your sales hiring process. That's important. And then you want to get into a sales management operating system. This includes mastering process methodology and the customer lifecycle we talked about, the activities that you want your managers doing. This just shows some examples. It might not be right for your company, but ensure the best practices are in place. Managers know what's expected of them and the activities they should be performing and how they should be doing each of these things. And then what are the individual and team meetings you expect managers to hold with their teams, and in what cadence? Weekly, bi-weekly, quarterly? Right? You start to get into a management operating rhythm when you put these in place. Then you put in the sales coaching framework that we just talked about and get that into a cadence, whether it's every 3 months or every 6 months, like we just discussed. And then you engage the sales managers in sales performance management and master that part with their teams. And then lastly, help the managers master the sales and management technology that not only support them, but that their reps should be using. I can't tell you how many times I've seen managers not understand the technology that's in place and not be able to guide their reps on using it effectively. If you implement a sales management system, this will support everything that we've talked about up until now. So let's get out of the sales prevention business and ensure that managers can spend time with their teams, get hiring right, maximize your investment in technology, get this operating system in place with a cadence of continuing activity, and then reap the rewards, because this will help you cement all of the things that we've talked about. The last one for today, using a continuous improvement cycle. Folks, I have one slide for this. When you do the kind of planning we're talking about here, when you create these kind of plans and you execute, you need to measure to see how each is performing, evaluate that performance, adjust, pivot, whatever you want to call it, shift, right? But continue to massage that, just like an airplane pilot going across the country, right? Every now and then they have to make minor adjustments along the way to get to their destination. And then this cycle continues. Sometimes, if you're looking at all 10 of these steps, you won't be able to implement all 10 at once. It's very hard to eat an elephant in one bite, right? So you might need to do phased plans where you put some things in place and plan, execute, measure, evaluate, and adjust, put some other things in place and go through this, and then continuously work to improve each of these things until you are a finely honed machine and you have radically changed the performance of your sales force, which is what we're all looking for, right? So no rocket science here, folks, but it is easy to lose focus. Don't measure just to measure. measure what matters most and what you need to know is working. If you're in enablement, this is a real opportunity for cross-functional collaboration and alignment. Look for dot connections across all these steps that we've talked about and just consistently work to get 1% better. So there they are in total, the 10 steps to future-proof your sales force and transform results. And by the way, the whole future-proof thing, if you go through these 10 steps and you're using a continuous improvement cycle and going back to strategy, tactics, and talent and execution periodically and ensuring the rest of this is in place, you will stay current. Your sales force will be modern. You'll be adapting to your buyers in the market. And that's how you future-proof and make sure that you stay that way. So if this has been interesting to you, I have a book out called The Building Blocks of Sales Enablement. It is published by ATD Press, so it is sitting in the ATD bookstore if you're there physically in Florida this year. If not, it's on Amazon or on ATD where there's a discount for it. And the building blocks reinforce and talk about some of the very same things that we've talked about here today. I also have created a rather large appendix for you. All right, there's contact info for me in there, special offers, and additional free content, all for you for just attending this and being part of this presentation today. Please feel free to download the slides, check all that out, and reach out if you have questions. So at this point, I hope this has been helpful. I enjoy doing this every year with ATD and the Sales Enablement track especially. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you this year, but I'm so grateful that ATD offered this opportunity to do an on-demand presentation. Thank you for watching today, and please remember to provide feedback to ATT about this presentation and whether you found it helpful. It will help them plan better events for you in the future. Thank you very much.